It's been nearly 3 years since Elex came out, and that means we'll have gone the longest we've ever gone without a Piranha Bytes game since Gothic 1. What's pretty crazy is Piranha Bytes have been really quiet about their next project. However, I've done some digging and there is a bit of information out there about Elex 2. It's all in German though, so it's pretty hard to find if you don't speak the language. I've gone through it all though so we can discuss it, so let's jump in. Hi, Estelden here. The original Elex is one of the best recent open world RPGs I've played, and it doesn't get the credit that it deserves. It's got incredible exploration, the role-playing aspects are very well fleshed out, and it was a real crying shame to see pathetic outlets like IGN criticising it when it came out, despite them really not understanding how the game worked at all. If Elex 2 is able to expand on all the great things about the first game, I really do think we could be in for something very special indeed. I've been doing some digging and Jenny Pankratz has been quite active on German forums recently. Now, as you might know, she's actually one of the lead game designers at Piranha Bytes, and that's the studio behind Elex and also the Gothic and Risen games, which are absolutely fantastic, as long as, of course, you ignore Risen 2 and 3. And she also happens to be the studio head's wife, so her words, they hold a lot of credibility. The forum in which she talks with people is called World of Players, and I don't know much about it aside from the fact that it's got a pretty active Elex community. Of course, though, it's all in German, so if you're not German or you don't speak German, you probably can't just jump on and read it all. Don't worry though, because I've gone through the tedious process of trying to translate and decipher everything. Now, I'm no scholar, I'm not Indiana Jones here, but I've done my best to find the key information that will be useful to anyone who's got a bit of a hankering for what's coming next in this potentially great series. And there's some juicy stuff here. Starting out, Jenny's talked a bit about how the current situation in the world has affected the team. Apparently they've all adapted really well, and while they would like to be back in the office where they can bounce ideas off each other and really challenge each other, for now they've just been cracking on. She then spoke about a trade show being cancelled that the team had all been excited to attend. There's every chance that she meant a gaming show, and it's very possible that Elex 2 would have been announced there if it had have happened. We have to remember that Piranha Bytes are now with THQ Nordic, and I imagine that they're the ones who make the decisions on when games are revealed to the public officially, so that to me is actually good news. It means the long wait is probably nothing to do with development issues, which I have actually seen a bit of speculation on, and it's instead likely that just circumstances led to Elex 2 not really being a more well-known upcoming game. Like, we know it's going to happen, but it hasn't really had a lot of talk or a lot of official input. Next up, she did actually speak about a number of ambitious ideas that were meant to be in the original Elex. However, due to the development schedules and just timing, they were left out, and given she was happy to admit all that, it tells me that a lot of those features may actually find their way into Elex 2. There's certainly a number of features in that game that I really do feel could have been fleshed out a little bit more. You think of the skill tree, which was reasonably more complicated compared to that of their older games like Gothic, but I'd love to see them really expand on that and the usefulness of all those skills. A lot of this information from Jenny has come in the form of a Q&A with German fans, so some of the questions then lead to something useful, so I'll clarify those as well. For instance, someone asked if there'll be a city as big as Corinus, the really big iconic city from Gothic 2, in this next game, and Jenny did respond and imply that there'll be numerous cities of different size. Now, that was a bit of a cheeky politician answer, but I do think that developers tend to avoid answering questions that they can't give a positive answer to. So I think we're safe in thinking there'll be plenty of large settlements in the new game. I'd really love to see them go all out with something like the Dome City in Elex 1 and really expand on that. That to me was absolutely the best part of the game, and it had brilliant choice of consequence throughout, and it looks like they've got plenty of feedback on that and will continue to expand on all those towns and settlements. Some really cool stuff came next as Jenny was questioned on the map system and how it's changed over the years from the original Gothic games. I absolutely loved how you had to purchase a map in those games and you'd have to often piece it together, rather than just have like an automatic marker you could use that tracks you around like a GPS. You really did have to work it out yourself and you had to read it like a real map, which I thought was really awesome. Now, Jenny responded to this by essentially saying that the setting of Elex 2 and the more sci-fi nature of it meant they were unlikely to go back to the old way, as they based it off what makes sense for the setting. I think that's a fair answer, and given we have GPS in modern day, you would imagine that in the world of Elex, they would obviously have the technology for that. I mean, they do have Elex, they've got the resource there, they're not just all about coal and electricity like we are. Something really important came next, because you'll remember that in the older Piranha Bytes games, how fantastic it was for exploration to find things like ogre roots that would permanently increase a stat when you found them. Exploration that's rewarded with my character getting stronger is something that I really love when it comes to exploring the map properly and being thorough. But Jenny has brought another perspective to that in the context of what they're going to do in Elex 2. She feels it can affect balancing pretty seriously, and while she didn't outright say we won't get it again, I do think that in developing their older titles they found it negatively affects the mid and late game. I don't think I'm alone in thinking that RPGs in general can be very hard to keep challenging the whole way through. Elex of course is no different, given after the initial struggle, you do become a bit of a god by the end of the game. I think that's completely fine as well. I mean, it feels rewarding to get to that point, but Jenny obviously feels that adding in stat boosting plants around the game world, rather than just the potions that they had in Elex to boost stats, might just start to get a little bit too much. A few little tidbits followed, including that swimming will return, but you just can't dive. That hasn't been added, so it'll be pretty similar to the original Elex. She also touched on a very well hidden quest from the first game, the Kalan Riddle quest. Jenny said this was her absolute favourite quest in the game, but due to only 7% of players actually experiencing it, they probably won't go down that road again, or at least that's very much what she implied. For those who don't know the quest, basically there's 9 pieces of a puzzle that you'll find scattered around the world, and they're called weathered pictures. Most people likely found at least a picture or two, but getting all of them plus figuring out where to take them to can certainly be pretty tricky. The good news is though, in a follow-up question, Jenny actually revealed there will still be plenty of different types of quests and secrets to enjoy, as well as Easter eggs for fans to find, so they're certainly not scrapping that style of quest completely. They'll just change it up and possibly have multiple little secret quests instead, rather than just one big secret that most people miss. I'm completely fine with that. What comes next is extremely important to the future of not just Elex 2, but Piranha Bytes games in general. Someone asked if they're going to change anything with their design to make sure they don't lose so many players in the early game. What they mean is that so many reviewers and players who bought Elex went in expecting a typical open world game. They expected a Skyrim-like, where they could just enter the world and basically do anything that they wanted. Pick up a weapon, go into the forest and attack enemies, go and clear those caves around the map, and just absolutely do anything. It was like an amusement park. Elex is very different because it's much more of a realistic affair. You start the game as a bit of a weakling, and logically, that means most enemies are just going to make short work of you. Now, you would absolutely hope that the average person would then die a couple of times to enemies and think, right, it probably makes sense for me to not go attacking anything that moves, and instead explore around the town and earn experience doing little quests. No. Sadly, the average player doesn't do that and instead bangs their head against the wall, fighting the same enemies, dying over and over, and to give you an example of this is a clip from an IGN review when the game came out to see exactly what I'm talking about.
Certain quests in Elex made me feel like I had to break its systems to win. Some required me to snipe a couple enemies from a large group at a distance, run several hundred yards to a shack with a bed, take a quick nap to regain my health and mana, and return to repeat this process 4 or 5 times. One boss took me almost 2 hours to slay because I had to get lucky and not trigger his unblockable, nearly undodgeable rock throw attack too many times.
This is not how to play Elex, and the game is specifically designed around you not doing that. Unfortunately though, the developers probably know that they need to give players more direction as to how to approach the game, and Jenny clarified that, implying they'll be changing monster distribution early on, possibly to make it a lot harder to run into tough enemies at the start of the game, and that they'd also do more with the tutorial system. It's not the end of the world, but just as long as they don't compromise what makes Elex the great game that it is. Jenny went on to mention that they've improved their game engine in a number of ways to provide better performance and graphics, so if that was something that did concern you in Elex 1, that's always good news. Byrne will also be doing the Elex 2 soundtrack, which isn't exactly groundbreaking news. I mean, he runs the studio, he's Jenny's husband, but any news at the moment is good news right now, so while information is scarce, I'll absolutely take it. Something that's really cool to note and a great reason to support this studio is that Jenny also spoke about crunch on Elex 2 and how it's not something that they need to do anymore. Hooray! She mentioned that during the Gothic days this was different and they did have to crunch back then, but that's absolutely no longer the case. They care about life balance for themselves and the rest of their staff, and they just sound like an absolutely fantastic studio and group of people. People sing the praises of CD Projekt Red for being pro-consumer, and that's absolutely great, but they treat their staff like shit. It's It's nice to be able to play a game like Elex knowing their employees are happy and healthy. They're not just being treated like slave labor. That was the end of a Q&A that took place a little while ago, but just a few days ago, she's posted again. And she touched on the disappointment of Gamescom not happening as a live event, which really makes me think that was the event she was talking about earlier that the team and her were quite upset they couldn't go to in person. While I'm sure they go there just to network in general, I really do think that they would have had Elex 2 to announce if they did go in person, if that had have been allowed, and then it would have been released late next year, which would just absolutely add up to the timeline with how the first game was announced and then released. In this post, she also talked about their design philosophy on projects like Elex 2. They'll have these major construction milestones, where they'll bring in a whole bunch of new features, they'll brainstorm a few, and then get to work on the ones that are really popular within the team and are sounding really, really good. So they'll repeat that process a few times, and then they'll get neck deep into the project. Once that happens, they'll reach a certain point where they'll stop doing that, as the boat has now set off, as she put it. And that means that introducing new systems will just be too messy to really do. The way she spoke about that really makes me think Elex 2 is very much on course. That ship is on its way, and we'll be getting it within the next 12 or 13 months or so, which is really great news. I mean, next year there won't be the hype of a new CD Projekt Red game. It's unlikely Starfield will come out. Pete Hines implied that's still a few years off, and this will hopefully mean that Elex 2 will get its time in the sun. It'll be one of the few RPGs on the new consoles, and hopefully that ensures that more people just give it a chance. I would love for there to be even more Elex news. I'd love that official announcement so we can then speculate and have an idea as to where this series is going. But it seems will be going on a little bit longer. We'll just have to wait. I imagine at this point that THQ Nordic will wait until at least after Cyberpunk to announce any new RPGs, not just Elex 2. And I think most sensible studios would probably be doing the same thing. They'll let that hype train die down, and then you'll have plenty of people looking around for what's the next big RPG. And that one could absolutely be Elex 2. Baldur's Gate 3 is very likely to see a full release in August or September of next year, so my money would absolutely be on October 2021 for Elex 2, so they don't compete directly. And then we'll finally get all the answers, and Jenny won't have to be so goddamn vague anymore. I will keep my fingers crossed that she slips up next time, gives us some story details, gives us some info on some new systems in a post, something like that. And I'll actually link the forum down below so you can keep up with any further developments if you see her post something new. I personally think less is more with an Elex 2. I'd love to see them focus less on the size of the world, but more so on fleshing out the factions we get next and ensuring all of the side quests are absolutely top-notch quality, like they were in the Dome City. I touched on it earlier, but the entire arc of that city was just so goddamn fantastic, and there were so many choices to be made. You dealt with the Thieves Guild, the Separatists, the Berserkers. There was a lot of depth to it, so I'd love to see that expanded on in the future. The only thing I might worry about with Elex 2 is just the fact that Risen 2 and 3 were absolute duds. So this was like the first game that was a return to form. Now that the studio is under THQ Nordic, I just hope they allow the games fans really want to be made and they don't obsess over ensuring that everything is accessible. There's enough mediocre RPGs like the remaster of Kingdoms of Amalur that we just do not need an Elex that's watered down into something similar. I do think an Elex that has the time in the oven, the polish to appeal to mainstream gamers, will eventually find its place, not just as a simple open world RPG, but something that's just so much more. Intricately designed like a puzzle and not just a free-for-all when it comes to how you explore the world. If we are looking at October next year for Elex 2, then it's going to be a pretty long wait. I'm going to really struggle to get my open world fix, as I just don't feel that many modern games really provide the same experience that Elex does. It's very unique, and most developers just push the whole, yep, you can go absolutely anywhere, the challenge doesn't really change no matter where you go, the quests are all pretty much fetch quests, that's about it. It's just really hard, because the mainstream gamer, apparently that's what appeals to them, but I don't know if it's true. I really do think that if Elex was understood by the gaming public and it was marketed in the correct way, I think a lot more people would give it a chance. I do think a bit more work in the polish department, that will stop putting off some of those guys who they'll play like a Dark Souls because it's hard, but they'll stay away from Elex, even though I think it's comparable but in very different ways. So I'm looking forward to this. I hope we get some more info news, even just like an official announcement. That'd be absolutely fantastic. So we'll wait and see what happens, but I'm not holding my breath for this year. I think it's going to be next year that we hear anything more. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.